So, hello there. My name is William Owen, and today we are going to be talking to Travis, who is Doc Stump on the Street Epistemology Discord server. You recently joined us. Is that right, Travis?
That is right.
Excellent. I mean, it's obviously right because we've just been talking about it for the last 2 minutes, but this is when the video starts, so now it's officially right.
Excellent. Official rightness.
Official rightness. So, what brought you to the Street Epistemology Discord server?
In simple terms, I was actually referred to it by the Mormon Stories admin team, which I was temporarily a part of, but I had this great thirst for knowledge where they're focusing a lot more on just the social support and the community aspect. And I'm like, gotcha. I got to get me into that knowledge area. And so they're like, oh yeah, go over to Street Epistemology. That's going to be your jam. So.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that is very cool. That's awesome. Yeah, we've seen a lot of people from that Mormon, former Mormon. So forgive me, because I got the impression, and I never really got to the bottom of this last time, that there's some contention around what to refer to former Mormons or post-Mormons as. Is that right? Or am I still haven't really understood whether I'm right about that or not.
No, yeah, and it's a little hard to understand when you're not immersed in the culture, but basically people care a lot about labels and titles, and it's very emotional war grounds over here in Utah. And so, like, not only on top of being sensitive to, all your hot button issues, you've got the extra layer of that Mormonism provides. And so it's like a whole nother realm of, like, you have to label yourself correctly, I guess, for certain people. Otherwise, they'll presume. Basically, it's a problem of presumption. Everyone just presumes everything about you based on what you label yourself.
Right.
And it's really frustrating. And so I kind of want to get past that. So I really don't care what I'm called. I identify with all of the things that indicate that I am not a believer of the one true path of the Mormon, however anyone defines that.
Right. That's so cool. No problem. I understand it. Labels are difficult. And people's understanding of those labels is difficult, and I can't imagine how much more difficult it might be if there's a culture built around that. So yeah, I empathize with the problem, even if I don't fully grasp the nuance of this particular label issue.
Yeah. I might be able to explain that otherwise, sure. But maybe something that might help too is like when you're consulting with people, like what they call themselves or how they refer to themselves. It's the same exact sentiment in terms of pronouns and those sort of things. Mm-hmm. It's like people tie their identity in a way to how they're referred to sometimes. And so you could just simply ask, if you're ever talking to someone who's heavily engrossed in those areas, how they prefer to be referenced. And then until you get to that point where you're like, okay, I've got a good picture.
I can take a risky punt and give it a go and see if I can guess which is appropriate.
Yeah. That works too.
Perfect sense. So no longer a member of the Mormon community, the Mormon faith, and arrived on the shores of the Street Epistemology Discord server. And
yes,
you said in
fresh off the boat.
That's an unfortunate framing. And there's a fascinated with the concept of truth, which is a great thing to write in your introduction. I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, that's exactly why I'm here. That's what kind of pulled me on my journey to these shores.
So I don't want to presume. So as someone who is no longer a member of the Mormon faith or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, if that's
you got
correct.
it.
Yeah. Then I don't want to presume that you are now a non-believer. But what would you say your religious perspective is now, if you're comfortable saying?
Sure. If I were to describe it myself, I'm an ultra believer in the sense that my journey through the church from beginning to end was only deeper and deeper and deeper till I was scraping the bottom and realized that there was a little hole and I could pop out of the bottom of the barrel and realized, whoa, there's more, there's more to truth than, because some people think within a religion, like, this is it. This is,
Everything.
wrap it up in a box and ship it because it's ready for everybody. And I learned through deep diving and digging around everywhere in as many ways as I could to try and understand that there's more. And so I wouldn't say that like I am a non-believer. I don't believe that it has as much as it thinks it has in terms of the culture, the individuals who make truth claims. And so, yeah.
So would you say that you believed in a deity, a godlike figure?
Yeah, and so yes, definitely. So to try and simply construct and define my original beliefs is that I believed in a physical incarnation of a deity who had all power, omnipresence, omniscience, and who had shaped and is continually shaping and guiding all humans on many different levels of their lives. And so that's what I used to believe, and that's, I think, a lot of things that people subscribe to within the LDS culture, Latter-day Saint.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
So you still believe in a deity of sorts at this point.
Yeah, so my view, my evolution of thought has evolved to where I no longer subscribe to even a consciousness, but rather my new deity has evolved to. And the thing is, in like the Bible and all the other scriptures that people call, and all of the texts, whether or not there's contradiction, they kind of all revolve around the idea that God is supposed to be at least all-knowing and loving, basically. And so like some of the statements that rang true to me before I had my current understanding of truth is that God is love and God is truth. And in order to get to know God, because ideally that's kind of where we're headed, is to be in line with God or to harmonize with God, you need to be able to identify and understand love and practice it, and the same thing with truth. And that is still 100% my foundation to this day, but it's no longer to appease a being or to fit in to some sort of mold. It's still my driving force that truth and love seem to be a universal driving forces behind my current belief.
If you define God as truth and love, then you're not going to hear many objections from me. I don't think. I think truth is a valuable and useful thing to pursue, and love is worth having and celebrating, and trying to do more with, I guess. And so so that sounds good to me. I think I hear that. It's strange. I hear that definition quite often within the religious conversations that I often have with people, that God is something like truth and love, or sometimes you'll hear something like God is energy. You get these sort of assertions that God is just this sort of force in the world. Many of those things I think are very difficult to square with, as you say, the sort of scriptural narratives of a personal God, a God that intervenes and cares about what types of love you're talking about, and how that love might be expressed. Is that?
Yeah, I don't understand the personal God sense of it all anymore. Well, because if one tries to come up with a colloquial definition of what God is, at least from my perspective, it's really this philosophy that a person subscribes to, and perhaps even is wanting others to subscribe to. And so, in that sense, sorry, I was going to tie that into what your question just was, but I forgot already.
Oh, I was just comparing the idea of, sort of, let's say, more nebulous ideas of God, love, life, and energy, or something like that, and truth is a great one. And the sort of scriptural personal God narrative that we get from most of the religions.
Yeah. And so, like, even a nebulous God doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because in context of what I just said, I feel like for me, the idea of God is basically the philosophy that you subscribe to. And so, the idea of freedom is, to me, is that we have the abilities to subscribe or unsubscribe at will. There's consent, there's informed consent, and we as individuals get to determine what we subscribe to.
Mm-hmm.
And so I see God is ill-defined in terms of a collective God, or in an individual God makes. I don't know if you kind of get where I'm hinting at.
I'm not sure I do.
Okay. So if basically God is your personal philosophy,
mm-hmm.
then to define what God is beyond that can get really convoluted and confusing. But what God means to me, it's like the philosophy I'm subscribing to now in my personal life is that there's a lot of patterns modeled out in the universe, and we are spawned of the universe. Therefore, being, and I've been watching miscellaneous YouTube videos, as we all do. Recently, Richard Dawkins, Neil deGrasse Tyson, just a lot of these people
mm-hmm.
that are huge on critical thought. And so I subscribe to the notion that as part of the universe, and the fact that universe has manifested a being, myself and other individuals in the society, beings that are capable of critical thought, like we can either lean into that, and the thing is, we're complicated individuals, or complex, as you could say. There's so many things working in our brains and our systems, and then we have to factor in the environment. There's so many levels. But if you're to kind of abstractify, I don't even know if that's a word, kind of take a step back from everything and say simply, what are we? And to me, it's like an amalgamation of evolution. Like, we literally have a history of growth recorded in our genetic code. And so we have to factor that into kind of who we are. But then also, we have kind of like the potential and where we're at right now of we are capable of critical thought. And it seems to logically make sense that in order to achieve like love and truth, critical thought is important. It allows us to communicate better, because you see like a lot of the angst in the world and the combat or whatever. It's very simple to see that a lot of it is emotion driven due to failure of communication and or understanding of the communication.
Oh yes. Very much.
And so like, you can't just be perfect at communicating, because that's only half the picture. You need to be able to, well, and even perfection's a whole nother thing to talk about. Yeah, I've got so much to street epistemologize. Like, so many things that I need questioned in my life because I have that desire to know.
That's great. Honestly, I love it. I love the energy. I was getting this energy from you in our text conversation, and it's just exactly the same in reality, in person as it is. It's great to hear. Yeah, I slightly feel that I've been getting into a TV show, a box set of a TV show, you know, and I've been really enjoying this for ages, and it sounds like you've just come in on like the season 1, and you're like so enthusiastic about it, and I'm like, I can hear this. I know, I remember being where you were.
Yeah. And then, no, and from what you're saying, that makes complete sense. Like, here I am discovering that, like, I don't know if, and that's what's cool to me is like, you have, not just you, so many people have different perspectives and different upbringings. And one thing that's, I feel like, a problem within society over here, and I don't know if it's the same where you guys are at, but philosophy nor logic are really taught hardly at all in public schools. And those are two key pivotal tools in being able to like love and grow in communication and understanding. And like, it's just crazy to me that that's not factored into public education.
I could not agree more. I could have said that. Like that those words have come out of my mouth more times than I can tell you. One of the really frustrating things is when you start reading ancient Greek philosophy and even pre-Socratean, like so Democritus and Lucretius. So there was a chap called Lucretius who wrote a poem called De Rerum Natura. Have you heard of it?
No, like I'm still on season 1, so I'm just like so pumped. Like I am desperate, and I have a massive thirst for philosophy, and I just like am just showing up at the giant, amusement park conglomerate world of philosophy, and I'm like, oh, sweet.
Well, the first thing to learn is never be embarrassed by not knowing something. There is so much to learn; it's obscene, and you're never going to learn it all. And there's always going to be things you don't know. And so, never feel like you're on the wrong footing just because you don't happen to have read a book or know a term. Honestly, the best thing to do, especially in a community like the street epistemology community, is just ask. People will be more than happy to explain it to you, and there's no shame in not knowing. And certainly not this poem, because it is a little obscure, but the De Rerum Natura is basically a poem by a chap called Lucretius, and it actually is weirdly the last and only real record we have of his teacher, a chap called Democritus's teachings, and this was pre-Socrates. And the poem, which you can get translated into English, thankfully, because I presume Latin is awful, is non-existent, in fact. And so reading this as I did, I became so angry. It is lucid, cogent, it's clear. It talks about, it has for the time, it's just a remarkably insightful attitude towards religion, education, and what makes for a good life, and how we need to stop pretending to know things and actually act on what we do know. It talks about the nature of our limitations of our knowledge, and I'm reading this and thinking, God, there are people that don't know this now, right? This is 2,000 plus years before, further on. And
so you said you were frustrated
because we haven't. What you were saying about not teaching logic and philosophy in schools is really frustrating, because you learn how valuable those things are, and actually how little you need to know for it to be almost immediately useful, right? So,
yeah.
So then when I read that somebody over 2,000 years ago was writing cogently and clearly, it's not, there's this weird feeling that we've only just discovered all of this philosophy, but it's ancient. It's older than
exactly
the religions. It's been going on for a long time.
So that frustration that you feel because of that, what would you say you think is the cause of the frustration itself?
It's that why if we had that 2,000 years ago, why on earth are we not further forward, right? Why am I not even taught the basics of logic and philosophy at school? Just the fundamentals. How different our world would be if just even a rudimentary understanding of fallacious reasoning would have been part of most public education. Would certain political campaigns be as persuasive at a national level if people had even the slightest awareness of how to spot a logical fallacy. It would be interesting.
Yeah. And that's the thing I've come to terms with myself, is that the frustration, yeah, is basically in terms of like, you can have the most pure ideals, but without being able to carry that into the mind and heart of somebody else and get them to embrace it completely, it yields, like, you can have the power, but without a delivery vehicle, it's useless. And so the frustration that I think, so when I was talking about like, God is love and truth, whatever, my philosophy, kind of taking into account human feeling and emotions and the body chemistry that kind of goes into that. It's like, I don't know a colloquial term that's not kind of crass, but like,
I'm fully up for crass. Don't even worry. It's all good.
Okay, but like, it's essentially like a cock block on like on an intellectual level. It's like,
yeah.
And so it's just like really frustrating, because like you can understand it so well for yourself, but there's obviously a missing link that a lot of people are trying to work on. And it's interesting. I was watching a video of Richard Dawkins talking with Neil deGrasse Tyson, and Neil deGrasse Tyson had kind of called out Richard Dawkins for delivering things so clearly, so efficiently, and so plainly that somehow it came across as arrogant, or whatever it might be, that Richard Dawkins, no matter how potent his ideals were, that his delivery was failing him. And Richard Dawkins kind of said, like, I wholly accept that criticism, and he's tried to work on that. And so here we are, you and I, we have so much to learn, and Richard Dawkins has explored vast amounts of knowledge, way more than us. And we can take from that in our, like, with the new generation, and try and apply that earlier and earlier on in life to kind of have more effect, as one might say.
Yeah, I guess as well that to a certain extent, part of the frustration I mentioned earlier is it suggests that kind of progress isn't as obvious as we might hope it would be. So, if Lucretius has discovered a lot of really good, sensible philosophical positions, a rational, what we would almost define as a modern mindset around some of this stuff, then why on earth, how do we keep finding that that's not the mainstream? Why do we, just because Richard Dawkins has done this work, there are just so many people that will reject it because of his tone of voice, because of his, exactly the thing that deGrasse Tyson was criticizing him for. And that's really deeply unfortunate, because, it doesn't matter the tone of voice, but it does relate quite nicely, I think, to street epistemology, which is, I think, makes an effort to, certainly in interpersonal communication, makes an effort to adopt the right tone of voice, and also not to tell people what to think, but to encourage them to notice that they should be thinking about things. And I think that approach, which is certainly different from the objective that someone like Dawkins will have as a science communicator, but that approach in general, I think, is much more effective at convincing people that there's maybe they need to go and do some work to think differently about things.
And so then I have a question for you. What in your endeavors have you discovered in terms of street epistemology having existed in former societies, and what has taken that away from them? Because I picture like societies where they used to like dote on philosophers. Like, I figure that critical thought was a very open and a heavily practiced thing, yet somehow it seems to have failed them due to some other factor creeping in.
It's a great question. I mean, the foundation of street epistemology is, and in fact, maybe a little more than the foundation, I'd say, is this thing called the Socratic Method, which is the method of question and answer, which was developed by Socrates, or at least if Socrates existed, if not Plato. But in any case, the Socratic Method, which is to ask questions that prompt people to think as well as understand is being much more effective than just delivering messages, delivering truths to people.
Definitely.
Is fantastic as a teaching tool. It's fantastic as a tool of actually reaching people. As regards to why philosophy has not done better, even though we had the Socratic Method, a hell of a long time ago. I'm not sure on my Socrates dates. I know I take a swing at it. I don't know I'd get it wrong, so I'm not going to. But
X years ago.
X years ago, I could edit that in. Actually, I'll just edit that in.
400 years ago,
according to Wikipedia. But there was one of there were obviously several reasons. Well, one I think is something like religion. I think religion has had an unfortunate effect on the human being's ability to develop and maintain systems of rational cognition and reasonable, critical thinking capacity. And I don't necessarily think that's their implicit objective, but it is a byproduct of their positions that I think religion encourages. And another part of that, which I think is related, sorry, I just want to, because this was a good question, but another part of that I think is are you familiar with the Sophists at all? That you may not have heard of them. The Sophists, they were a group. They were essentially a group of rhetoricians, philosophers, if you like, of sorts.
Like SOPH.
Yes, I think it is. I'm dyslexic, so I have no idea. There's probably a Q in there somewhere, but it's the origin of the word sophistry. And the Sophists essentially would be this sort of roving band of guns for hire, who would basically, if you wanted to persuade somebody to your cause or to change policy or argue for you in court or something, you would
protection money of ancient.
You'd hire these guys to come and use clever language and words and logic and reason to fight your cause. Because people,
so kind of like the opposite of, like, instead of persuasion through intimidation, it's through intellectual stimulation.
Yeah, I mean, I can't claim to know their methods, but the argument goes something like, that they would just come and speak very well and eloquently, and they would use logic and reasoning, but they would also use persuasion and rhetoric, and they would lay out the case very beautifully, such that nobody around could argue anymore, and it was all done. And even and the point is, of course, that they didn't really much care for what argument they were fighting for. So it clearly persuasion was a huge part of this thing, and so look, for a long time, I think people have been genuinely fearful of people who can be persuasive, who can make a strong argument, who won't fall for fallacious reasoning, and could potentially use that same logic against other people. I think it makes people uncomfortable. And we see echoes of that in the current modern trend of anti-intellectualism, I think. We're frightened of what we might have to do if the smart people say it's a good idea.
Yeah. And so, like, the thing that I commented to you previously outside of this video, I wasn't even trying to follow the tenets of street epistemology, but I had made a comment in some political post saying that, we need to be more loving and accepting of one another. And I suggested that the way to do that was through, critical thought and kind of not just subscribing to a lot of predetermined notions that people are this way or that way or whatever. And someone had mentioned that, you can tune out as many voices as you want, but that doesn't mean you have the ability or the power to tune out the devil. And I like, to me, I'm like, it's so interesting to me that you've subscribed to a philosophy that you can't even trust yourself.
Yeah.
I'm like, how does one operate on that level?
If you want, so street epistemology would be a good way of talking to somebody who makes that claim, right? Yeah. Like, whether they would want to have that conversation or not is a separate matter, but or would trust the street epistemologists who clearly would be categorized as working for the devil in that case. the idea that that person really genuinely believes and acts in that way is alarming, you know. And this is the problem. It's like some of these religious narratives have become incredibly dangerous. You know, Dawkins talks about memes, you know, ideas that reproduce and replicate and take hold and become more reproducible. You know, these ideas of the devil, you know, of good and evil implicit, you know, of God versus, you know, man, and they're just incredibly compelling to a lot of people. Like, this person clearly could derive value from that worldview, right? Like, I just have to keep holding the line. I just have to keep believing against all the odds, against anything to the contrary. Just hold the line. Just hold the line. That's a narrative you see in far
Finance.
too much. Finance. Well, I was going to say far too many religious people, but I guess finance is a religion of a kind, I'd say.
Yeah, it's yeah.
Travis,
Definitely.
I've realized we've been talking for a while now, and you've teased several times your interest in leaving the church story, and I would be remiss if I didn't give you this opportunity and finally find out for myself what your Mormon departure story sounds like. I'm not sure if a Mormon departure story sounded like the right way to frame
And
that.
so I think to make it efficient and clear, that's something I think that would be best told at a different time.
Okay.
With a little more, like, with enough context. Like, the context is what makes it juicy, because like it builds out so many like ironies, and like I don't know how you feel about irony, but it's just like,
I'm
when
English. We're partly made of irony. That's
yeah, the richer the irony gets, the more satisfying it feels to hear the story, and when it comes to a good conclusion too. And so I feel like to do it justice, I would need to make sure that the context is there.
That's quite welcome. So what is your encounters with street epistemology been so far? How have you found the community, and what are your thoughts so far as somebody new to it?
So you reached out to me pretty quickly.
It's that bad.
And
it got better from then on.
Your username said robot, and I was like, okay, is this a bot or is this a person? And I'm like, it's kind of cool that someone has set up a bot to invite people to tell their story. But then, and you know, I'm like, that's pretty cool. And then I'm like, wait a second. I'm like, this seems not that generic as I would expect for a bot to be. So then I'm like, wait, is this real? And then, yeah, and then here I am. But
oh my god, I'm so glad I started this other channel now. That's perfect. You're dead right. That makes perfect sense. I was just it's difficult to know what to say. You know, you don't want to jump on people too abrasively, so you don't want to sort of you know, and also, you know, everybody's different, so it's really so there's a tendency to want to be polite and civil and not be too pushy, and sometimes that can come across as a little bit, you know, copy and paste or robotic or like
yeah. Well, your language is very clear, concise, and eloquent, and I'm like, someone put a lot of thought into this, like, and I'm it's rare to find people in a lot of circles I'm in who actually put considerable thought and effort into communication directly to you as an individual, which is actually really sad. But
yeah,
anyway.
well, I mean, it's a skill. Well, maybe it's not a lack of people that would want to do it, but maybe a lack of people that recognize its value. I mean, it's
definitely.
I think the more I interact with, you know, just a wide range of people from a large range of different beliefs and ideals and backgrounds and life experiences, and you know, the more you realize, fundamentally, for the most part, most people are just want to get on and be and don't want to be assholes. You know, people want to be nice and want to be kind and thought of as nice and kind and good. The you know, if you pardon the idiom, the devil is in the detail. But you know, in any case, it's comforting to know that nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks, how can I be an asshole today? Or at least very, very few people do that. So when people aren't as charming as you'd hope, I try to remember that they're probably just making a mistake rather than not being.
Yeah, well, and that all ties in as well to what you're saying. Ties into like my kind of general philosophy of how people behave in general. And so, like, I also haven't studied psychology. Like, there's so many things I have yet to study, due to many factors. But I have still built out on my own understanding of things, and people. There's so many daily drivers who drive based off of a lot of the chemical responses in their body. So, like, people who talk about the spirit, and some people talking about it being equated to what's called elevated emotion, like our body chemistry has huge influence over our behaviors.
Sure.
Yeah, and rightfully so. Like, we evolved from beings that our whole survival depended on instinct. And so, but a lot of that's still heavily ingrained. And so, helping people to understand what they're feeling and giving them options, they'll definitely choose. Hopefully, like you said, they don't wake up and say, how can I, give into my feelings today to make the world a more miserable place for other people? Like, really, the majority of people are just looking, probably as you've discovered elsewhere, is like, there's like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So many people are just so wrapped up and obsessed with fulfilling as best as they can what they think is what they need.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't spend enough time actually considering what's kind of triggering those needs or why it's a need in the first place.
It's very true. There's a few things you said there that I think probably warrant a little comment. One is, don't fear a lack of education, background, historical, familiarity with this stuff. As I say, not everybody is given the amount of things that we could know. We're all massively ignorant on most of it.
Yeah,
right? So,
I'm used to being ridiculed for like sharing my ideas, and people are like, "We already all knew that, dummy," and I'm like, "Oh,
well." but that's neither here nor there to a certain extent. I mean, there's a thing. Are you familiar with the Dunning-Kruger Curve? Are you familiar with
Nope.
Dunning-Kruger? Dunning-Kruger is just brilliant way of thinking about how people evaluate what they know. And there are lots of conclusions and interesting inferences you can draw from the Dunning-Kruger curve. But basically what they discovered through testing was that essentially the less you know about a subject, the more you are likely to overestimate the amount that you know. And the more you know about a subject, the more likely you are to underestimate the amount that you know. So a great example of this is language. If I'm trying to speak Japanese, right? I'm trying to learn how to speak Japanese. And early on in my endeavor to learn how to speak Japanese, I started to feel like I was really getting a hang of it. I could say hello and goodbye and please and thank you, and I could say, I'd like this or I'd like that or what have you, and I'm thinking, oh, I'm nearly finished with Japanese. And then essentially, once you start to really understand Japanese and the obviously much more complex nature of its nuanced language and its use of, subtle inference and social contexts and just and the words change so quickly and so rapidly, and then you suddenly realize, oh no, this is impossible now. So you kind of go from this heap of overconfidence to plummeting down this valley of despair where you think there's just no point in even carrying on because like this is just overwhelming, there's too much to learn, no human can do this. And then you slowly but surely ratchet up and climb out of the valley of despair and start to actually start being confident that you know a small amount of something.
Yeah.
But
at least you're headed in the right direction.
Right.
You can take confidence in the fact that it doesn't really matter where I'm at. I'm just
yeah, exactly,
making progress, and that's where I'm at.
Socrates said true knowledge is knowing you know nothing, and I think that well, he didn't quite say that, but anyway, the story that he tells is basically summarized in that way, and I think it's I think it's one of the most useful things to remember. Like, just the moment you think you really do know something. I mean, this speaks to your idea of the fascination of the concept of truth. I'm a philosophical skeptic, I think there are true things, but I don't think we can ever know that we know them. And I think ultimately truth is just an aspiration more than it is something that we can actually wield. So I'm of the opinion that like true knowledge is knowing you know nothing is exactly right. Like I can't really know anything for sure, and maybe what I know is just so small an amount as it practically counts as nothing anyway.
Yeah, because you can't. Yeah, like I agree with, or I can subscribe to that. Like, truth isn't something you wield. You wield confidence in
Exactly
certain
right.
principles, and so like you're not guided by truth per se. It's kind of interesting, but
Yeah, you want to believe as many true things as possible and as few false things as possible. I think that's a Matt Dillahunty line, and I think that's exactly right. And like the fact that in my view, you can't philosophically ever know that you've gotten to a truth, isn't relevant. Like what's important is that you're striving to make what you think of as a truth closer to the actual truth, right? And become more confident in it if it is close, and less confident if it isn't. That's all we can do.
yeah. And I don't know if I'm fairly confident that we as humans will ever get, at least within any short amount of time, close to the truth in any regard. But ideally, if we're still working towards that for whatever future generations, and whether or not we integrate with robots and other tools that we're able to expand it to multiple dimensions and integrate our perceptions of that into things, who knows? Maybe we can get to the truth, but yeah, like you said, that's not the point. The point's not to have the truth.
It certainly seems sufficiently inaccessible to us for now that I think anybody, well, one way I will use the concept of truth and indeed certainty is that anybody who claims to know it, I'm highly suspicious of.
Solid.
And especially anybody that tells me that I just need to believe their truth, that they know the truth without necessarily telling me what it is doubly on the suspicion list.
I subscribe to that hardcore. Yeah, like
I'm interested.
External authorities are very strange. Also.
It is very much so. I'm just interested to reflect on a little bit what you said about your view, and I don't want to keep you too long, but I was just interested whether your view of your God, your belief that you described. It seems where you defined it, I think, as truth and forgive me, love, right? Truth and love, is that right?
Correct.
I wondered if they were not, when you say God in that sense, like do you mean it in a sort of a euphemistic sense of like these are guiding principles, these are things I consider to be the things to care about and focus on?
Yeah, my full definition of God and love and truth, they're all abstractions of what I fully believe. And yeah, where it would be considered euphemisms as well. Very much so.
Gotcha. I had a conversation with a gentleman about 6 months ago, I think, and basically after talking to him for a while, it became pretty clear that he was just using the concept of God as a synonym for hope. Like he just wanted to have hope that things would get better. And so he didn't pray, he didn't believe in heaven and hell, he didn't subscribe to the major religions, but he said he believed in God. And as we talked about it and we sort of stripped away all of the things that he might be packing into this concept of God and finding that no, he didn't have any of those in his definition, all that was left was just that it was just something he wanted to cling to. But in essence, it was the essence of hope itself that was remaining inside his God. And that's all that was in there, I find it interesting when people, I think, feel that there's a definition of God like that works for them. I find it, that's a God I would find it very difficult to convince you out of.
Yeah. Well, have you been here? Can you think of a time where you felt ultra desperate to the point where you can only cling onto one ideal?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I see that people kind of get triggered to a point where they just jump back to the ideal. But another thing I'm learning recently is the power of the subconscious to drive decision in times of desperation. Like, and I don't think I'll just say I know an individual who was under extreme economic stress. Like right now where we're at in Utah, and it's probably kind of all over the place too within the United States. But and I don't. And that's the thing is I don't follow economics outside the U.S. either too much. The point being, inflation's going ham. Like so many people are being crunched out of being able to afford rent now, and so we're going to basically be forced relocated. And it's just very, very desperate times where we're at, and I had a guy I know. He's like, I went to my employer and basically told them that I started looking for other opportunities, even though like I desperately love my job, and that he hadn't even started actually looking for opportunities. But out of desperation, he just told his supervisor, even, and the supervisor's like, well, what do I do with this information? Do I just give you more responsibilities? Like, and so like people are just kind of sometimes just operating out of desperation. And so it's very interesting, like how many people's behaviors, but also ideals and things that they're subscribed to are more or less kind of out of a desperation mindset. And then
Absolutely, yeah. I think there's the existential and there's the all too immediately present. There's the the kind of ideas of death and suffering and pain and misery and like the things that people genuinely afraid of and don't know how to handle, and that can drive panic and fear and then as you quite rightly point out, people go through a lot of traumatic times and difficult things, and it's that they reach to whatever it is that they have to hand to give them comfort is not something I think I would ever criticize anybody for. We all are trying to get through this thing, as easily as possible and with as little pain and as much happiness and joy as possible, right? And I think that's empathy is critical. It is one of the things I'm keen on trying to continue to encourage within the SE community. Empathy is important. It's not sufficient just to say that you're wrong. It's enough to recognize that, hey, but you're another human being, and we know.
And if I could, I just want to make like maybe one overarching statement and purpose about myself is that like, so when I highlighted the Neil deGrasse Tyson to Richard Dawkins interaction of Neil deGrasse Tyson proposing that Richard Dawkins take his information and more or less package it up in a way that's empathetic or deliverable, where like you have to kind of meet people sometimes. You have to go sometimes 90% of the way, maybe even more, so that they can receive the message. And so, like, just keeping that in mind, I feel very strongly with you that empathy is huge, but it goes, it delves into the deep sciences of how to understand emotion on a chemical level, and there's so many, I guess, points of data and factors that work into how somebody's feeling. And so if you can truly tap into how they're feeling and assist your ability to tap into how they're feeling by understanding chemicals and trauma and parts of the brain that get triggered, so you can paint that picture more accurately, your ability to communicate, like, just, I don't know if it's not really exponentially, or it just gets so much stronger, I think. And so the final thing I want to say about that is like, that's basically my whole purpose now in life, is to take those two and marry them together. The ability of harnessing truth and the ability of communicating that truth in a way that people, maybe I shouldn't say truth, because like you don't wield truth, you yield confidence. But And I have my own philosophies on that I'll probably find someone to talk it out with more, and so I'm not
Do
using up a lot
not
of your time.
no, do not worry. Look, um, one of the things that's useful to think about, well, I would add to what you were saying there, is that it's as important to recognize that you cannot know what somebody else is feeling and thinking, right? It's important to recognize that your life experiences and your mental condition, your physiological condition, and everything that is you might just simply not map on to the experience that this other person is having, and therefore your intuitions, your inclinations, your reactions to this are not going to be analogous to what this other person has experienced or is experiencing in this moment. So yeah, if you can remember that, whilst gently and politely and civilly inquiring about them, you'll do just fine. Yeah.
So you might see this weird smile creeping upon my face because I have an action plan to actually make this thing that you're saying that you can't really map it out. So I am going to be pursuing a master's of data analytics, and I believe strongly in the power of machine learning. And I want to harness the power of biotechnology to work with machine learning to assist in mapping out feelings and communication. Wow. So that if you want to convey an idea to somebody effectively, you can just basically the point will be the computers will aid in getting us to express exactly what we're feeling, so empathy becomes easy. And so I'm planning on that. That's like my whole life mission now, is because I am so into future technologies and the problem solving power of computers. If we were just to try and crunch with our limited capacity experiences and trying to figure out somebody, our power is so insanely limited. But the power that the computers have to harness points of data and I feel like that's going to aid so much in communication. And that's why I asked the question with you about what's failed society in the past about street epistemology kind of getting, what have they lacked? Why has religion been able to take over time and time again? And I think we just didn't, and this is kind of just a working theory, I didn't think we had the power and the tools to effectively deliver empathy to where everybody needs it. And I think we're so close to having that power and the tools to truly communicate on so many proper levels.
Travis, you are a minefield of interesting conversations, and I'm sure this is just one of very many on and off camera. But in any case, it has been absolutely delightful speaking to you. I'm really, really glad you're here in the SE community. Really pleased that we got a chance to speak today. Thank you. Yeah, it's been great. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm really looking forward to our continuing adventures so I can hear this phenomenal deconversion story of yours.
Yeah, and I'm so excited to be a part of this community too, for the sake of a lot of people joining for the same idea and reason, that we just want to understand better for whatever reason or another. And a lot of people are going to have very valuable experience that will help me to achieve my goals, and hopefully I can do the same for others.
Yeah, but by and large, this community is definitely curious and keen to share and explore ideas, and that's always a good thing, I think. Travis, it's been a pleasure, mate. Thank you very much. Take care, and
thanks, Will.
Yeah, we'll speak to you again soon.
Very, very pleasant conversation. Talk to you later.
Awesome. Goodbye.